So Harry and Meghan have had enough. In fact, it's so bad they're even prepared to spend half their life in Canada. Is this the beginning of the end of the royal family? Of course it isn't, but it does give us an opportunity to ask whether the royal family is worth it for all it costs. And nobody seems quite sure on what that number actually is. Do they provide a return? Isn't the money better spent on hospitals and schools and other good stuff like turning Big Ben on for Brexit night? Yeah, it's a bit of a different podcast today. It's more gossip and populism and less deep economic thinking for a change. It's the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. So are the royals worth the money we pay them, or do they need to be semi-privatised to make their own way in life like Harry and Meghan seem to want to do? Well, look, the Queen is funded by the revenue from the Crown estate and getting a proportion of that back. It's actually pretty hard to try and make sense of what they are getting their money from. If you go to the royal family's own website, royal.uk, all the meaty information is bedded deep down in the website. It's not in the menu, so it's actually hard to find. But
that's interesting. Okay, trusty, you went snooping.
I went snooping. I found, in fact, I ended up looking at magazine articles rather than official data. But so a figure that was in Vanity Fair that the royal family, they say, costs each taxpayer 69 pence a year. So certainly the expenditure on the sovereign grant is £67 million a year, which doesn't seem a lot, especially when the Crown estate is giving £330 million to the Treasury. So it looks like the royal family is costing us, I don't know, somewhere between 70 pence. I've seen other places saying it's about £1, but somewhere of that ilk. But that money is being determined by how much money is being earned from things like the Crown estate. So in effect, you could say, and I've heard this argument, that the royal family is actually costing us nothing because they're raising revenue. But, they've got a property portfolio worth 12 billion, including sort of Regent Street, a shopping centre in Worcester, all the various palaces, country retreats. They've got hectares of land across the country. The Grand Duchy of Cornwall owns a huge chunk of the West Country. So, the money that's being earned from that, they're basically giving that back to us and then taking a large slice for themselves. But of
How
course,
large is the slice compared to what is the rough ratio?
I think it's, 15 or 20%, I think they're taking back, which seems like quite a lot given that the assets are quite large.
Yeah, I mean, it's a case of the devil you know versus the devil you don't. If that actually was privatised or, it turned into public ownership, you wouldn't see much of a change, and you'd lose the entertainment value of watching the tabloids talk about Meghan and Harry.
Right.
So I'm ambivalent on this whole one. I mean, there's an extent.
I think I am too. This is going to be a very boring conversation, isn't it?
Unfortunately, yeah, we agree. I mean, we agree. We don't know what we're talking about. So,
well, no, look. I mean, I think. It's what I don't get is that they own these portfolios. Some of them are a bit strange. So I can understand that the royal family would own Windsor Castle and Balmoral and Buckingham Palace. I don't get why they own a property portfolio that includes Regent Street, a shopping centre in Worcester, and bits of land around the place. I don't understand why they would be and running this basically as the Crown estate, running it as a company. It's got a CEO. They're managing that money, and then and trying to maximise that. Why is the royal family doing that? Why wouldn't we be saying no? This, why are we taking money that we're giving them, and and some of the assets that they've had in the past to invest in further assets rather than just leaving that to the free market? Why would they own a shopping centre in Worcester, for example?
Well, they used to own the entire country. I mean, this is we go back to the to the day where freehold actually means that you hold. All the land is owned by the king, or the royalty, fundamentally in the British legal system. And when you buy a freehold or a leasehold, and the crazy land system, and I couldn't believe how complicated the British land ownership system was. But buying freehold doesn't mean you've got it indefinitely for yourself. It's actually at the whim of the king. It's still a remnant of the day.
A leasehold, you mean?
No, even freehold.
Right.
Okay, freehold doesn't, like, and the same thing applies. In Australia has a far more well-designed land ownership system with what's called the Torrens title. When you hold freehold, you have that indefinitely. There's no such thing as buying a lease off somebody else. A lease is a totally different thing where you are leasing a property off the landlord. And like in a 6-month lease or 1-year lease. The property I was living in the UK, the people who own the leasehold, well, their leases were about to expire, and they were debating with the freehold owner whether they should extend it for 75 years or 150 years. So it's a crazy complicated system. And this again reflects the old feudal days of the society. But fundamentally, everything, because the state was formed in its feudal days, the remnants of that still exist in our capitalist world now. And fundamentally, any land you own in the UK, I understand, this is certainly the case in Australia, you own at the behest of the Crown. It isn't an absolute ownership. It might be in a system which didn't have its legal system evolved during a feudal period. So, you got a choice. You want your landlord to be a feudal remnant, or do you want to be a capitalist remnant? On that particular front, I'm still rather ambivalent. If you didn't have them owning Regent Street, you have who's the potential capitalist owner of Regent Street? What sort of British capitalist could you think of? That would Lord Sugar be a potential example?
I'm sure he hasn't got that amount of money. But it would be a private equity firm, wouldn't it? That you'd be answerable to. Probably not a British private equity firm. It would probably be foreign money that would be.
Saudi Arabian. So in that sense, I'm not. It is just one of those interesting historical quirks that the British royal family owns as much as they do. Directly. I think, of course, they own everything legally. They own a certain amount directly, and that's where their revenue comes from. If you kick them out and put anybody else in charge, I don't know about. I don't think I'd be going off to read the gossip pages about Lord Sugar if he bought any bits and pieces. No. Or Mr. Sugar. It would be after that. But it is just. So
the question then becomes, okay, if they've got that, they're making money out of it. The question is, how much do they take back and to look after themselves? And I think the figure is about £300 million a year. And I must admit, I found all these numbers a little bit confusing, trying to get to an accurate one. But if we say it is 300 million, it actually doesn't sound like. I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's not in the scheme of things. It's not a great deal, is it? When you think that one of the things people think about when they think of Britain around the world is the royal family.
Yeah, I mean, it's been well marketed. In fact, I think I'm in the Netherlands a lot of the time now, as you know, and they've got a royal family here, but they don't have any.
With an Australian.
Huh?
With an Australian.
No, that's Denmark. Sorry.
Oh, Denmark, of course. So,
something is Australian in the state of Denmark, not in the state of Netherlands.
That's right. Sorry, I do apologise. Yeah. So what about your role? I mean, you don't see a lot of them, do you? Or
the place that I've bought in Amsterdam is a 300-metre walk from their palace.
Right.
And it's a much more physically accessible building than Buckingham Palace. There's no gate surrounding it, for example, but nobody comes to the Netherlands for to get high on the royals. They get high on other stuff over here. But in the UK, yes, it is definitely a tourist attraction. So you look at it, okay, yes, they might be taking say 15% return when a landlord effectively might, in terms of total revenue, and a normal one might take say 10%. But there is also the marketing element to them. The question is, how long is it going to last? Because
because they're all losing interest very quickly. Well, I mean, there was a company called Brand Finance in 2017. They tried to put a value on the whole thing, as brand companies do. So they say the tangible assets, the Crown Estate, the Duchy of Lancaster, the Duchy of Cornwall, the Royal Collection, including the Crown Jewels, all of that they reckon is worth, or was worth a couple of years ago, £25.5 billion. And then they said, you can add the intangible value, so the benefits that the monarchy provides to the UK economy, like tourism, for example, diplomacy, all that sort of stuff. They said that was worth £42 billion. So all up, they reckon the value of the royal family, what's that? It's about £47.5 billion is what they're worth. So. Yeah, it's certainly a lot more than you would value the royal family where you are, or indeed in Denmark, even if they do have an Australian in their midst.
Yeah, and so that is a contribution, a historical quirk leading to a positive contribution today. And if you eliminated the royal family or you'd be destroying that potential tourism value as well.
Yeah.
Mind you, the thing, if I find anything negative about the royals, it's really about the washover into the Tory mentality in the UK, the born to rule side of attitudes there, which coming in as an Aussie and having experienced that on a few occasions. So I had a most recent meeting in, I think it was Cambridge University, where I got a taste of that yet again. I won't mention names, but it was I wasn't impressed. The born to rule attitude, that it's not the royal family itself that has that, it's the washover of the social class out of which they come. And if I look at it, my explanation to the level of separation between the average person in the UK and the born to rule upper class elements, I really take it back to the Norman conquests and say that the Norman conquest completely wiped out the Anglo-Saxon ruling class that was there, installed the Normans over the top of them. The whole Domesday book was about working out what the assets were worth and putting William the Conqueror's lackeys in control of the entire country, and an enormous separation between the ruling class and the mass developed out of that. And I think it's still there. That is,
but not in the royal family, though.
Not in the royal family. This is the funny thing. It is not the upper echelons that have that arrogance and dismissive attitude towards the populace. It's really the hangers-on, the people who go to the Eton and end up, I think every last bloody prime minister in the UK, bar one or two for the last 100 years, has been an Eton graduate.
Yeah, so it's more a result of the education system, perhaps, rather than...
but the education system preserving this idea that we are part of the royal...
just of the rich.
We are born to rule. Okay, the born to rule thing. So that's what really irritates me, far more so than the royal family itself.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I mean, it's a fascinating sociological experiment to watch what's happening with them right now with the whole Harry and Meghan routine.
So this is the interesting thing, isn't it? Because Prince Harry is in effect saying that he wants to privatise his bit of the royal family. He wants to stay associated with the family, but he wants to earn his own money, but he wants to live off the name. So now, if it was a company, they'd charge him fees, wouldn't they, to use the brand? But and is this the first sensible step in a royal family that fends for itself for a bit more, or is it a dangerous direction that he's taking the royal family in?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a sideshow to the whole thing over time. But there's some dysfunctional personal behaviours in the middle of that entire family, which of course I have absolutely no knowledge thereof. But
they do insist on stopping this inbreeding. That's the problem, isn't it? That's where it all falls apart, when you start to you allow outsiders in the family rather than marrying your cousins. Which is the this is where it's all going wrong.
Well, we tend to forget that the First World War was in large part due to the fact that too many of Queen Victoria's descendants were running the various royal families of Europe, and up into and including the Russian royal family. So the inbreeding was far more dangerous back in the days when they actually run things, and when they were just became a sideshow for entertainment, as they seem to be now.
There's a lot of costs anyway, aren't there, which we would have to incur if we weren't paying the royal family through the royal family for them. So a big chunk of the expenditure on the royal family is actually on property maintenance, about 38 million a year. That's part of our heritage, and that seems fairly small bickies, really. Because we've got to maintain Buckingham Palace. We're not going to turn it into a hotel. If we did, by the way, it's worth about 2.5 billion apparently. But if we sold it for 2.5 billion, someone would struggle to run a profitable hotel based on that. So it's a bit of a meaningless.
It's too far from the city. Yeah, you got
exactly
Green Park getting in the way.
Yeah,
too far of a walk.
Well, you'd have to turn Green Park into a car park, wouldn't you? A multi-story car park. But I think
that's an idea. Yeah.
But I think if you spend that amount of money, then you're going to find it very difficult to actually charge a room rate that people are going to be able to pay. We look at Windsor Castle. I mean, these are things. It goes back to the days of William the Conqueror. I mean, we are keeping it in a working condition rather than a lot of our old buildings, which are in a derelict state. So the one thing the royal family is doing is keeping these as living, working buildings. So that's got to be a good thing. And all of that helps tourism. So we've got 40 million people visiting the UK each year. Half of them are visiting the UK. 40% of them are here on holiday. They're spending about £25 billion in the country each year. I suspect if we didn't have the royal family, a chunk of those might disappear.
Yeah, and I think, again, there's extent to which humans should respect their history more than they do. I mean, the extent to which there's been destruction of historical monuments and losing the connection to your past history, even if you don't like the fact that it was something which was feudal and, imposed by a foreign invader and so on and so forth, it's maintaining your long-term memory. So even though the current ones seem to have short-term memory loss problems, I think it's important to maintain that long-term history of where our civilization came from.
And it is a bit of a furphy, isn't it, to say, well, let's do what's done in some other countries where they have reduced the number of people who are on the civil list. In other words, the number of people who are being paid. Because actually, how many people in the royal family you pay is small compared to the cost of maintaining all the sites and, maintaining the whole entity of the royal family. Whether you've got 10 people or 45 people who are claiming money on that's a small consideration compared to the whole cost, like maintaining all of these properties, for example.
Yeah, and if you wouldn't necessarily maintain the properties, you're saying if Buckingham Palace got sold and turned into a hotel, then there wouldn't necessarily be the maintenance of the grounds around it. They'd also be saying, how can we exploit those, et cetera, et cetera. So to some extent, it preserves part of the culture outside the more rapacious aspects of capitalism that we regularly bemoan. So, in that sense, I can live with the royal family. I just wish they weren't called the titular heads of Australia. There's
another thing.
Royal family, but we've moved along long enough not to have a governor general.
Absolutely, we need to. Australia needs to break off so it can start its own royal family.
Oh God, the Morrisons, wouldn't that be great? Yeah, well, he believes in.
Well, I think Bert Newton or someone like that, perhaps. But how are Harry and Meghan going to, how are they going to survive if they lose their income from the Duchy of Cornwall, which is where they get their money? That gives them about $2.5 million a year between them, apparently. But $2.5 million again, it's like that's a lot of money to the average Sun reader. Who probably is a big supporter of the Royals, but $2.5 million
100 times as much, yeah.
But $2.5 million. I mean, Scarlett Johansson made $40 million last year. So I mean, if the Duchess of Cornwall can get a part in an Avengers movie, and Harry can be the new Superman, they're quids in, aren't they? I mean, this is it. She's from a background where you can make a lot of money, so maybe they will make a go of it. And it does that. I mean, I've been watching the news over the last week or so, thinking, who cares? And does it matter if they want to break off from the royal family? I mean, they're not in line to the throne. They don't change the value of the institution in any way. If they are going to cost us a bit less, might save me a penny a year.
Yeah, and I think there's absolutely no doubt. I mean, we live in the world of celebrity culture. So the Meghan was a celebrity in her own right before the whole marriage routine, and Harry, as a leaving, will be a celebrity. So there's absolutely no danger of them, having to sell their souls on street corners while we remain the type of capitalist economy we are now. So they're going to do very nicely out of the whole thing. The royal family itself, I mean, what a shake-up. To have somebody saying, I want to leave the royal family. It's only happened once before, and for reasons of marriage back in the Second World War. To happen this time after the marriage has happened and saying we want to leave, it'll do the tabloids a lot of good.
It will. Meanwhile, in Denmark, I was wondering I wanted to see how much Mary was getting. So Mary, for those who don't know, was the Aussie girl. I think she was working in real estate. She met a Danish prince, Frederick, the Crown Prince of Denmark, at the Slip Inn in Sydney during the 2000 Olympics.
What a wonderful way!
And do you know what? I think I actually was there that night as well. That's the curious thing.
You blew your chances, mate. You were already married.
I know, that's right. Yeah. And there I was. I was in my short skirt and my stilettos, and it didn't work. Right. I could have, yeah. But so I was wondering how much she gets paid as a Danish royal. In Denmark, there's the royal family, the total state subsidy to the royal family is about 15 million. There, I think now, unless you are in direct line to the throne, you don't basically get any money whatsoever. So it's a whole different quantum in terms of cost to the state. But then, no one goes to Denmark to see the royal family, do they?
No, no, and that's the thing. The Brits have got this. They are the last major empire at the sort of decline of feudalism and the rise of capitalism, and now we have a world where tourist attractions can be a major form of revenue, and it's the only royal family that has that status. If we've been dominated by the Danes, they'd be going to Denmark instead. So there is something unique about the British royal family.
I must say, enjoying you talking about fondly about feudalism, something you rally against, and let him. Here you are, you're loving it.
Feudalism.
You like my brother who says he's a staunch anti-royalist. Every time there's any royal occasion, he's got a street party. He's rolling out the Union Jack bunting in the street, and he's part and parcel of it all.
You're not going to see me go that far. But what I know about the feudal society is that it wasn't as obviously it was a power structure where the ruling class had complete control. However, they also faced peasant revolts quite regularly. When the United States, the peasants are revolting is a double-ended joke, and one of the elements of those revolts in the UK was that I've forgotten roughly when the statute came out, but the statute was passed by the House of by the royal family, House of Lords, that a peasant could have no less than, I think it was 4 acres of land to work on for their own needs. And I think there was a set maximum number of days they could be required to work on the royal estates as well, which meant that a lot of the peasant life was working for 2 days and relaxing for 1. So in that sense, there were potentially more rights, effective rights, even though you had no political power, more formal political power. Some better controls and better guarantees for the poor in society than you have now, where you see masses of homeless everywhere. London, in some ways, I think, being the world capital for homelessness. So the feudal society had its checks and balances as well, potentially better than we get into capitalism, where we say, let's remove the checks and balances and let the market decide who gets what. So, yeah, I've got some residual fondness for the feudal period.
And you look at, where we are on the world stage, and if it is costing us 300 million, it's not costing us that. But if we took in all the income that they were getting and claimed it all directly, then it would, they are costing us 300 million. We've talked about the tourism benefits, but there's also the diplomacy as well. I mean, how much influence does the royal family have? For example, will we get a better trade deal out of the United States because we rolled out the red carpet for Donald Trump, and everyone came and apart from Princess Anne, God bless her, everyone came and shook his hands and gave him a good show and all the pomp and circumstance, and he loves coming over here for that. So, and I think maybe other world leaders the same. Is Britain standing in the world better than it would be? Well, it has to be, doesn't it? It's got to be better headed by the Queen than headed by Boris.
Yeah, we have a significance which is outside the actual economics, which has been declining for a century. It is a relic which has some residual value. And again, like maintaining the history and the culture, I can cope with it. It's the scale of spending and the scale of revenue back means that you can't decide this on the issue of costs. So I can handle the royal family, and it's actually I must admit I need a bit of a break from the heavy work that I do regularly, and the Harry and Meghan soap opera is a reasonable piece of entertainment. And
I guess also, there's the whole charity thing as well. So if you've got a whole bunch of people, and I know you like the idea that, for example, we should all, there should be a universal basic income.
Yeah.
They're a bit of a test bed for that, aren't they? It's just that the amount of money we're paying them is slightly more than we might imagine.
Universal outrageous income.
Universal outrageous income, absolutely. But so what do they do? Well, they've got to fill their time, so they go, well, okay, we'll go to charity events, we'll help raise money, we'll become advocates for this and that, so long as it's not too political. Let's try and fill the gaps that society isn't looking after, bridging the gap that where capitalism isn't working, and so maybe that's, ironically, maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, a bit of a counterpoint. You're letting us know that there actually was a different social system once to capitalism, even though they're now heavily embedded in the whole thing, and it's all become a fun form of marketing and tourism revenue. It reminds us there are different ways to organise society, and that's not a bad thing to be reminded about at times like the current.
Well, there we are. Good on the royal family then.
Yeah, so we don't disagree. What a pain. We didn't have a fight. What a drag. Yeah.
Well, I've spent my entire life with disinterest in the royals, but but mainly because of the gossip within it, and the day-to-day stuff just actually does bore me by and large. But I can see the benefits it's provided, and I tell you, a day out to Windsor is a great day out. Wandering around Windsor Castle is a brilliant day out, and you can see why so many tourists flock there. And you do actually, when you're there, you do feel a little bit proud to be British, I have to say. So,
well, I actually enjoyed being. I've done something you haven't done. I've slept at Windsor Castle.
Have you? What? In the grounds after they closed the gates?
No. There's actually a whole community there, and there's actually
wasn't Prince Andrew and his friends, was it?
No, such fun. No. Thank you very much, mate. There's an obvious feature of my taste in women that means I didn't nowhere near that territory.
Right.
There was a conference I was invited to, which was held in the grounds of Windsor Castle, and the accommodation was in Windsor Castle. So maybe I'm biased.
Maybe you are. All right. Very good. Well, good luck to them all. Good to talk, Steve, and we'll catch you again next week.
Okay, mate. Bye.
And it is a slightly meatier, less vacuous subject next week. Is the share market killing innovation? Stocks are running away with themselves at the moment, particularly in the United States, which accounts for close to half of all the world's shares in terms of value. But does a rising share price do anything for productivity or for company growth? And if not, why are we so fixated with it? Is there a better way of ensuring that resources are allocated to support businesses with the greatest potential to grow and meet our needs? That's next time on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. I'll see you then.